Hey, hello out there. Welcome back to our podcast. Excited to be with you today. This is Coach EJ, the brand.
Hey guys, and this is Coach Aaron the Source. Just wanted to remind you guys, we're now putting these on YouTube. If you don't know, I know a lot of you guys are listening to us through Spotify and Apple podcasts and that sort of thing. If you don't mind looking at our ugly mugs, then check us out on YouTube as well. Sometimes things are lost in translation, especially with my dry humor. You don't see my facial expression. Um, Today, EJ got a subject from one of our clients,
Right.
Robert Miracaj. I hope I didn't butcher your last name, but something we've talked about at the gym. Some of the parents, they come in and, I'm able to chat with them a little bit, get a little more insight on, their experiences with their athletes and just in general. Helps me keep my finger on the pulse of some of the issues that are facing parents. And he was kind enough to actually volunteer a subject, and it's something that we actually have been talking about with his son. And that subject is, how do you manage an athlete through a growth spurt? And it's a very timely conversation. But I'll let you go ahead and start.
Sure.
Give us your input as well, EJ, and then we'll kind of go back and forth like we normally do.
Aaron, it's interesting because this has come up over the past month with me several times with our players that are young as freshmen, or they've been playing and they're growing really, really fast. And it's hard to kind of figure out what's going on. The player's getting a little bit slower. They're sleeping more. They're hurting or aching. Their joints, bones are aching. It's something I think is real important that parents, have a good feel for what their athlete's doing. Because, old school, back in my day, you'd be like, "Oh man, you all right? This, hey, rub some dirt on it, man. You good? You'll be all right. Go loosen up and put some Bengay on. Go put some DMSO on. You good." But that's not like these days. These kids are different, and I feel that it's important to understand your athlete, your young son or daughter, and listen to what they say, because it's coming up quite frequently now, Aaron. It's not like every once in a while now. I see a lot of kids going through these major growth spurts, and we just need to take a step back, pump the brakes, and kind of understand what's going on. So I think this is a really good subject that we can really expand on today, and give all our listeners out there, some good sound advice.
Right. No, I completely agree. And it's funny because this is something that's kind of been in the back of my mind, and probably it's just the culmination of a few of the topics we've actually already had recently on our podcast. I mean, we've talked about, we had the one, it's spring, but keep an eye on summer. We talked about dealing with summer injuries. I talked, I think we even did one about training over the summer, continued
Right.
training, things like that. And actually what I did around May or June is I just started kind of identifying some of those athletes that I thought were going to be, if they weren't already had started puberty, but would be going through those sorts of changes
Right.
over the summer, and just kind of pulling those athletes aside and those parents and saying, hey, look, you know what? This, and the phrase that I used was, this should be a summer of transformation. And
I
what
like
I
that.
meant by that is, recognizing that some of these athletes are going to be going through these growth spurts, puberty, things like that. And a lot of these changes are going to be happening over the summer, and actually capitalizing on that and taking advantage of it, but also being aware of, some of the challenges that they're going to face. So, and that may have been why we had that conversation with, I had that conversation with Rob. And but I think that's something I've really keyed in on this summer in particular, because I have a lot of middle school athletes. I have a lot of kids who are, or maybe seventh, eighth graders, or eighth graders who are making the transition to high school. And so there's a lot going on with these athletes. And one of the things that I've been preaching is that reason why this can be the summer of transformation is because you have so much available time. You have the time to get the proper sleep. You have the time to eat correctly. You have the time to train. Now, again, I'm still hearing excuses of, well, when do I get my training in? Well, yeah, you have a 2-hour practice, but what are you doing the rest of the day?
Right.
So it comes back to how are you managing your time? And, if you want to be a D1 athlete, or if you want to be a high school athlete, then you've got to kind of train like one. And just saying, well, I had practice today, and so I don't need to work out, or I can't work out. That's just not living in reality and expecting you're going to be that level of athlete. And, there's levels to it, and there's volumes, intensities, but I think that goes hand in hand with this subject. To get back to the question at hand about how do you work an athlete through, a growth spurt, puberty, that sort of thing, is you've just got to monitor your athlete.
Right.
And again, I talked about those key things. 1, you monitor the training. 2, you monitor the volume and intensity. You monitor your recovery. You monitor your sleep. You monitor your nutrition. All of those things play a factor. And I think that's one of the worst things you can do is push an athlete physically through this point. Okay. Now you may have to push them mentally. Okay. Because again, you've got an elementary school athlete or middle school athlete. They aren't quite aware and in tune of what's going on or what's happening with their body. And so they don't always have the communication skills to really articulate what's happening to them. So yeah, now some of them are starting to have, muscle soreness. Whereas before, they could run and play all day and do all these things and never pay the piper. But now that their body's changing, oh, this is aching, that's aching. And sometimes they misinterpret that as an injury.
Right.
And you really just have to sit down and explain to them, no, your body's changing. This is what happens when you exert yourself. And now we really have to be conscious of what are we doing with our recovery. So recovery is no longer, go sit on the couch and play PlayStation for 2 or 3 hours.
Right.
Now recovery might be soaking in the tub for 15 minutes, icing a particular part of the body, rehydrating and refueling after a hard workout session. Maybe getting a light stretching or massage or foam roller session in later in the evening, before you go to bed. So now you've got to introduce all these other processes to take care of the body. It's not as simple as go play, then go do this.
Right.
So I mean that's some of the opening things that I'm thinking about in terms of how do you help an athlete manage through this this particular part in time.
And Aaron, we deal with multiple sport athletes a lot too, not just, specialization in one sport. And the biggest thing I see too, when they go through these spurts of growth is, they're playing a lot of sports, overtraining by playing too many sports, and then they can't recover.
Yeah.
They can't train.
Right.
They can't sleep.
Yeah.
And their nutrition's spotty. And I think parents, we need to recognize that don't overschedule your athlete, during this time. I think that's huge, Aaron. And, you and I talked about this quite a bit. The scheduling of the athlete with not only sports, but other activities. The mind and body have to work together.
Yes.
There's this synergy there.
Right.
And when you do it too much, the athlete cannot rest or recover correctly.
Right.
And I think that's another point, Aaron.
Yeah. There's an article on the website, gamespeed.net, that's the warning signs of overtraining. And you guys can pull that up and take a look at it, because it talks about the things to look for in terms of if your athlete is overtraining or getting to that point, in terms of excessive soreness for, excessive periods of time, flatness, mentally and physically. Maybe they start to get little, nicks and knacks types of injuries a lot more frequently. I would say go through, read that, and get yourself educated on those early warning signs, because my rule of thumb is for every day you overtrain, it takes at least 3 days to come out of it.
Wow.
You need to at least give yourself 3 days recovery. So you can dig yourself a pretty big hole really fast if you don't catch those things ahead of time.
Yeah, true.
And, I'm sure this summer, parents are seeing that. We just had one of our other podcasts about athletes getting hurt, injuries during the summer. A lot of that has to do with, one, not creating the base that they need to have, and two, overexertion, overtraining, or over competing probably is the best.
Over competing, yes.
Is probably the best description. Just today, I had at least 2 conversations about overscheduling your athlete. And they were both new parents who wanted to come to have their kids participate in game speed. And I said, well, look, it sounds like you've got a lot of activities here. Something's got to give, the volume intensity may have to change, but you're starting to play with fire now. You can't do everything all the time.
Yeah.
And just because it's available doesn't mean it's timely. Like we always say, there's figure out the reason in the season, and there's a season for everything. Put it in its proper place. And you might have 3 or 4 things, skills training, practices, physical training. And each one, the priority may shift, the volume may shift, the intensity may shift throughout different times of the year. Don't be afraid to change that dynamic. It shouldn't just be practice, 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 and then my skill set work, and then my training. There's some times of the year where you may have to say, hey, you know what? My skill set needs to take priority, then my practice, then my training, or my skill set, then my training, then my practice. However that trilogy needs to be prioritized, move it around. Again, I'm having that conversation with all of my softball players, because I know a lot of them are finishing up, and they're going to be having somewhat of a letdown for about a month or so. And we're going to try and get some loading done with a lot of those athletes. So you have to be strategic, and you have to manage this stuff and map it out as best you can, versus just, okay, we'll throw this in now, we'll throw that in now. You're not maximizing the time and resources spent on these activities if you don't plan them properly. Yeah. And again, that goes back to handling, these dynamics with some of these athletes. If you're finding that your athlete's going through a growth spurt and, they're having Osgood slaughters, which anyway, the whole knee thing, right? Then you've got to maybe make something else a priority. Maybe it's recovery work. Maybe it's training to get certain muscles stronger so that they don't have that achiness because of, maybe there's some weakness or something going on. Maybe you have to do more rehab sorts of things to get them out of this, or help them manage themselves through this phase. But you can't be afraid to take your foot off the gas and step back a little bit on some of these things.
Aaron, I like what you said there at the end about, taking your foot off the gas pedal and kind of like managing your athlete and understand what's best for them. And in our society today, we have this, this rapid instant gratification of, we got to be there, we got to go here, we have to do that. You don't. Yeah. You really don't. And when a player is going through a growth spurt. A young athlete, they're awkward. They could be clumsy. Their timing could be off. Coordination is off. And it's like, well, we got to invest more in lessons, or we have to invest more in this. No, you don't. This is natural. It's going to happen. You start seeing the hair grow, or you start seeing their limbs start getting longer, and they start to maybe their structure of their body changes a little bit. And that's when you just have to manage your young athlete correctly and get them where they need to be. And it's going to go away.
Yeah.
You just have to be patient and understand you are not missing anything.
Yeah.
It's puberty. They're getting stronger. They're getting faster. They're getting bigger. That takes time for the body and the mind to work together, get all that coordinated. Right. And that's when we need to really, Aaron, stop and say, it's all right. And here's another thing I want to mention, because we talk about managing that athlete, but the psyche of that athlete, when it starts to happen, they start to doubt themselves, like, what's wrong with me? Right. There needs to be some parenting here, or ask your mentor, your coaches, to help them work through that, because the athlete suffers here in this. What's going on with me, Aaron? I mean, hey, what do you think about that, man? I see this all the time.
Yeah, I mean, part of just kind of, and I've been doing this for so long now, I'm always just looking at athletes, and yeah, I may not be saying a whole lot, but I'm noticing things, and I might say, oh, Mother Nature came and gave you a visit, since I last saw you, or, stuff like that, because I notice that, hey, you know what, this kid's feet have gotten big, or, they're kind of being pulled out a little bit, or their legs are thicker, whatever the case may be.
Right.
But yeah, I'm always cognizant of that, because I have to make the appropriate adjustments in the training. That's why I do customized training. And that's why I don't do, kind of everyone go through a circuit sort of thing, because everyone is going to need different things, because they're all going to be at different points in that spectrum. And yeah, part of that is talking to them and saying, hey, look, I've seen you've grown 4 inches. You're probably going to lose a little speed right now. This is how we teach you to work with your new body, because you don't have the old body no more,
Right.
And so, yes, there has to be, some kind of education, so that they continue to have the proper mind-body connection and proper mind-body image, because everyone gets caught up in what they used to be able to do.
Right.
And that's the one thing I hear about parents. Oh man, they used to be fast, and now they're all awkward and clumsy. Well, that was, 20 pounds and 2 shoe sizes ago.
Right.
And so he's got to make the adjustments, and he has to learn how to change those motor patterns, so that way he can move efficiently, or she can move efficiently, and not get hurt. And then they've also got to understand that, hey, this may take some time. This may take a summer. This may take, half a year. This may mean, instead of you being a middle infielder, you go to the corners.
Right.
So that may mean changing positions. All of those things are factors, and you have to, again, like you said, you have to counsel your athlete so that they understand what's happening, know what they're going through, and also be involved in those choices, especially if it's changing a position.
Right.
Or even changing a sport.
Yeah, I mean, we see it, Aaron. I mean, it's just like we work with so many athletes in this age group, just because they've been in our program. But, I tell athletes, I tell parents this all the time. Don't worry so much. Yeah. Just it's part of growing in that sport, or growing in that body that they have. Right. And you need to just realize that part of this management, I call it, you got to manage your athlete. That's what I call it, is manage your athlete. Talk to people like you, Aaron, and get some really sound advice, because they start thinking, well, maybe that's not their sport, or maybe they're not doing well. What's wrong with them? And I think they worry too much, personally. Yeah. And I think that's when we need to really, give them good advice. I talk a lot I just had some pictures, and, we caught it in time where he says, I'm having a little soreness here in my elbow. I'm like, hey, let's stop right now. Let's just stop. Let's go get it checked out, see what's going on. And the surgeon says, hey, the growth plate hasn't formed yet. Let's stop pitching. I shut down 3 or 4 pitchers the whole summer just because they're having growth spurt issues and it's in their elbow or something's going on in their shoulder. Not because they threw a lot of pitches or they did something crazy. It's, hey, this is going on. We need to stop. We need to, maybe get them into some physical therapy. Let's change their routine. Let's do these things in order for us to be healthy down the road, which is important instead of the short-term thing.
And that's why the training and the activity has to match where the athlete is. It has to meet the athlete where they're at. I just had this conversation maybe yesterday or the day before, and I had 2 soccer athletes in there, and they're probably about 12 years old.
Okay.
And, and they come together, and I was telling one, I said, look, this one here, we've got to start to do more resistance training. We got to get him more physical. He's starting to get taller. He needs to learn how to produce better force with this body. He's going to be running into mismatches in terms of kids bigger now because he's going from the 8th to 9th grade, all those things. Right. And then the other one, I said, he was smaller, but he's a little more muscular built. I said, we don't need to do that with this one because if we start to give him too much resistance training at this point, now we run the issue actually of, I think athletes can be too strong. And that's where you have those growth plate issues. And so that's where you have to be careful of what activities you're putting your kid into, because he might be, and we went through this with some of our star athletes, James Darnell, very muscular athlete at a young age, very powerful.
Yes.
And if you throw weight training onto an athlete like that, you're asking for, in my opinion, you're either asking for an elbow injury or hip injury, because they start to generate so much torque in those areas, and those growth plates aren't completely closed. They run into those injuries where, now you've got that, UCL, you've got the hip separation, and those injuries take a long time to recover from.
They do.
And, most people want to say, well, they think it's the weight training. No, it's the weight training added to the activity as well. You can't have them being explosive and doing these high velocity things at a young age and then throw weight training on them, especially if it's not at the appropriate time for their body.
Yeah. And that's why I love what you do, at Game Speed, Aaron, is that, your programs are so customized for each athlete that you can see like, okay, no, you need to do this over here and you're growing. Okay, let's take a step back and move into this. And I think that's critical. It's all right, and you and I are professional coaches and we're competitive, but we know how to pump the brakes and say, hey, wait, back off a little bit. Let's be smart about this. We think your career is ahead of you, not behind you.
Right. Exactly. I love that. I love that. Love that you said that. And you alluded to this one part, and you talked about degradation of motor skill and performance and technical ability. And that can happen for some athletes. And one of the biggest things that or conversations I have initially with parents when they have athletes between the ages of 10 and 14 is that, hey, they were doing so well, then they grew and their body changed, and now everything went haywire. I mean, it's the most common problem. So you're not alone, guys, out there. This happens to most everybody. You can have the most athletic 8-year-old, the guy could look like he could go on Ninja Warrior. And then over one summer, the guy is looking like, somebody through what's that TV show, The Splash one, where they're running water obstacles and looking a little clumsy. That's just how it happens. And so understand that can happen to your kid. It can be a momentary thing, but now you have to, it doesn't mean you have to take your foot off the gas in terms of doing things, but you do have to redirect and navigate, instead of just straight line, balls to the wall, pedal to the metal. Well, now you got to take the foot off the gas and slalom your way, to your destination.
Yeah.
So that can mean a lot of different adjustments, and you have to be ready for that. You have to talk to your kid about it. But it's not an issue to take one step back, to take two steps forward, if you think of it in those terms. But the skill set can suffer and the performance can suffer. But again, that's when you say, you don't hide from it and you don't press them. You say, what do we need to do to work through this period?
Right.
Because they may need a new skill set, a new set of motor skills for the new body that they're going to have on the other side.
Right.
So trying to make them do all, giving them more of the old may not be the answer.
Well said, my friend. Well said. Aaron, I don't have anything else on that.
Me neither. My mouth is dry. I'm good.
Yeah. But parents out there, you're listening, people out there, athletes, you're listening, hit us up on YouTube. Everything we do, give us a text message, email us, let us know about subjects you want to hear about. This is our podcast, The Brand and the Source, and this is what we do. We talk about things that are relevant in sports and in life. So again, this is Coach EJ, The Brand.
And this is Coach Aaron, The Source. Again, check us out on YouTube. Feel free to comment, post whatever you'd like. I'm practicing my Spanish, so instead of see ya, I'm gonna say nos vemos. I think that's it. Take care.
We'll see you later.